You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Mining has long divided Palawan, the island province often called the country's last ecological frontier. But this year, after decades of resistance, its provincial government passed a landmark moratorium on new mining endorsements. I'm Bella Perez Rubio, and in this episode of Teka Teka, we sit down with environmental lawyer Griselda Mayo Anda, who's been at the heart of this fight for over 30 years. She walks us through how civil society, church leaders, and communities came together to secure what could be a turning point in Palawan's environmental history, and what challenges remain.
My real name is Griselda Mayo Anda, but my nickname is Jerty, Gertie. So I have been a public interest environmental attorney and an environmental advocate for more than 35 years. That's how old I am. And I co-founded the Environmental Legal Assistance Center. ELAC has survived. It's more than 30 years. I'm the current executive director. I'm also a professorial lecturer on natural resources and environmental law in the Palawan State University School of Law. Since I was a young lawyer in the early 90s, I've been drawn already to the issue of mining. So I've been exposed to the extractive character of mining and how difficult it is to manage it, and how um, even if you have a mining act, I also saw that the benefits of the law were more in favor of the corporations than the environment. And even the fiscal regime, whatever we get from mining is still much smaller compared to other countries in the world. And therefore, I saw in terms of cost benefit that the cost outweigh the benefits. I've seen that for more than 30 years. But Palawan, which is unique and governed by a special law called the Strategic Environmental Plan for Palawan, RA 7611, and which provides in Section 9 of that law that all natural forests are areas of maximum protection, ironically, has not been covered by any moratorium ordinance. So, um, we have been looking into the impacts of mining, and then in 2008, we proposed for a moratorium. But the lawyers of the provincial government and some officials were saying it's ultra vires, it's outside of our authority because the acceptance, processing, and approval of mineral agreements was within the domain of the Mines and Geosciences Bureau. So they said we can only pass a resolution. So my resolution on a resolution providing for non-endorsement of small-scale mining, and also being critical, okay, of large-scale commercial mining in Palawan. But despite that, there were still mining applications being processed. And then there were impacts already. It's the mercury contamination was gone a long, long time ago, and the city of Puerto Princesa have already excluded mining as a source of revenue since the 1990s when the mercury contamination issue erupted. But outside of Puerto Princesa, it's still an uphill battle. So after 2008, there were new applications processed, there were expansion activities, and fortunately, under Secretary Gina's time, she was convinced that there has to be a stoppage of mining in this last ecological frontier.
She's referring to the late Gina Lopez, the former Philippine Secretary of Environment and Natural Resources.
So we launched the No to Mining in Palawan campaign in 2011. Actually, that was the day before Doc Jerry was assassinated. He was also one of the champions.
Jerry Ortega was a broadcast journalist, environmentalist, and staunch anti-mining advocate. He was gunned down in Palawan in 2011 after a radio broadcast.
So then it was a 10 million signature campaign. We hit the 10 million in 2015 because of Secretary Gina and the network she had, no? Which was very unique. And also, at about the same time, before 2015, in 2012, President Benigno Aquino actually was a recipient of the signature campaign. Secretary Gina Lopez went to him. She brought me with him, with Attorney Christian Monson,
as in one of the framers of our Constitution.
My first encounter with Pinoy, very interesting. And she presented, all modesty aside, our slides I made, on mining. She presented that. She added all the additional information. She presented it to Pinoy. President was listening and he formed a technical working group.
Thanks to that 10 million signature campaign, in 2012, President Aquino passed Executive Order 79, a partial win that temporarily froze new mining applications and marked Palawan as a no-go zone. Attorney Mayo Anda says this reduced applications from 429 to just 11, but that freeze would later be reversed.
It was short-lived because President Duterte issued EO 130, lifting the moratorium in 2021. Now, by then, we already saw that there were active, mining activities in the south, and people were complaining. And then, despite the SEP law, there were still new applications being entertained. And because the moratorium was lifted under EO 130, there was now a deluge of mining applications. So when the governor, our current governor, um, organized a Congress on Mining and Environment in April of 2024, the three bishops were there. We were there. The mining companies were there. The academic institutions were there. The scientists, the indigenous peoples, DNR, the Palawan Council for Sustainable Development, Philippine Statistics Authority, the ILG, NEDA. Yeah, all of us, all the stakeholders were there for 3 days, April 24 to 26. And the governor listened. And then on the last day, there was an online voting. And 80% voted for a moratorium on new and pending applications.
Sorry, online voting among who?
Among the participants of the Congress, we were more than 100. And then, according to the provincial planning, that was the result. Now, I think that had an impact on the governor because in September last year, during a State of Palawan address, he spent like 10 minutes uh, pushing for a moratorium ordinance. He listened for 3 days and he saw the need to um, have an ordinance, convincing the Sangguniang that we need an ordinance to stop new and pending mining applications, stop the processing. So then, three board members who are members of his, of his team, lodged the ordinance, a draft ordinance, and then modesty aside, we helped craft it. Okay, our group. So the ordinance was lodged before October, I think early October, but the Committee on Environment of the provincial government did not do any hearings. So the bishops met with civil society and said, I think we have to push the Sangguniang Palalawigan to hold hearings on the draft ordinance, and we should push for a signature campaign.
They launched another signature campaign, this time led by the bishops, who issued a pastoral letter. Between the physical and online efforts, they gathered over 100,000 signatures, which helped push the provincial board to finally hold public hearings throughout February.
And by March 5, there was a plenary. They passed the ordinance without any objection. So I I said, is this really real? Because there was a division. But I think what resulted to that? First, they modified the ordinance. Instead of a moratorium on acceptance, approval, and processing, acceptance, processing, and approval, it was a moratorium on endorsement by the provincial board.
What does that mean?
So the moratorium on endorsement, because endorsements by the provincial board will be necessary, Isabel, for any special tree cutting permit or mineral production sharing agreements, for exploration permits, endorsements will be necessary. So they said that was well within our domain. The provincial legal officer gave his opinion that it will be beyond our authority if we will say acceptance, processing, and approval because that belongs to the DNR MGB, Mines Justice Bureau. So it was a moratorium on endorsement. So that's the label of the ordinance, which was fine with us, as long as there will be no endorsement. So it's 50 years. And the ordinance also provided that it will be locked in for 25 years. You do not have to debate to lift it.
Here's what that means. Contrary to some reporting, the ordinance isn't a moratorium on mining per se. It's a moratorium on endorsements. The DENR can still process applications, but projects can't move forward without a provincial endorsement, giving this ordinance real teeth.
And that's why, if you saw the news, there were already statements from the nickel mining industry, right? The I don't know if the Chamber of Mines made a statement as well, assailing the ordinance, because definitely it will halt. It will definitely make it difficult for them to get the expansion of their mineral agreements or the tree cutting permits that they want to secure, because nickel mining in Palawan requires cutting of trees. It requires removal of trees, deforestation talaga, and then you remove the topsoil. So it's not like underground mining. It's really surface or open pit. By the time you extract the ore, nothing will be left. Okay, so you remove the forest, you displace the wildlife, you remove the topsoil, so you can get the nickel ore.
Well, that actually brings me back to a point I wanted to circle back to is I was hoping you could situate the current state of mining in Palawan, meaning how prevalent is it, how much and what kind of harm is it causing?
Okay. At the moment, there are 6 areas in Palawan where mining is very active. One is in Ryutuba, Barangay Ryutuba, Bataraza, and the company also intends to mine in the adjacent municipality of Rizal, but they haven't started that. They were given in last year a special tree cutting permit by the DNR to cut 52,000 trees. Imagine, 52,000 trees. Now, in Brooks Point, the company has been given special tree cutting permit years ago to cut 27,929 trees. The company is saying that they have cut almost 7,000 trees. But even 10 trees, in a forest, which is natural forest, is really disturbing. Plus, this is rich in biodiversity. You have pangolins here, bear cats, birds, monkeys, and many other animals. So it's really sad that the DNR issues only tree cutting permits, and yet they're so gung ho about pangolin. You know, and there's pangolin all over the province. That of course we'll debate, where they are at the moment, because they allow the tree cutting, but they do not assess the wildlife present in those forests. So you have Bataraza, Brooks Point, Quezon, Española, Nara, and Aborlan. So 6 areas. Now, Aborlan, they haven't really started cutting trees, but they cut trees to build the road. That's the problem. It's forest, and to enable the trucks to load the ore, you have to really build roads, and that requires removal of trees. So that's happening already in Aborlan. In Nara, forests have already been removed. And on the harms, well, Yutuba nickel mining has been there for 60 years, as early as 1993. And the farmers who complained have gotten tired. Some of them have gotten out of the municipality. So when they say, okay, binayaran kami, but it's not full compensation. And there are still ongoing threats, no? Like um, last year, there were already issues of flooding, even this year in some areas. Plus, the area where cutting has been allowed is natural forest. Okay, the old growth forest has not yet been delineated as well. In Brooks Point, I talked to the lobster fry fishers. They used to earn like 100,000 to 300,000 a quarter, but they're gone because the area where they used to gather lobster fry has been the site of the wharf of the Ipila Nickel Corporation. So they reclaimed the area, they dump soil, so the coral reefs have also been covered with silt, and they could no longer gather. So the lobster fry area is already dead. So there's no more livelihood for them. They were given 300,000, but that's very small, compared to what they earned for a year. Some of them were given 300,000. Others did not accept it. But the reality, Isabel, is they could no longer gather lobster fine.
Yeah. That 300,000 was meant to cover essentially a lifelong loss of livelihood.
Yeah, but that's not lifelong because they used to earn, 600,000 to even 800,000 annually. Because the woman, Alaima Tambiling, whom we provided legal support, I mean, advice, okay, and was already tired, she was forced to work as a security guard here in Puerto Princesa because she could no longer gather lobster fry. So she was displaced. And she has 5 kids. She's poor. So we have her testimony. So there are many others. Others are tired.
How common are stories like that one for people who live in areas affected by mining projects?
For the lobster fry fishers, there are many who are afraid to talk, but all of them are affected. Especially those who receive money, they refuse to talk anymore. But all of them, that will not be less than 20 fishing families. Okay. Now the farmers, um, I haven't counted them, but the irrigators groups, they're also not less than 20. They can be more. Now, the the reality is the impact of mining, it has severely divided the community. The indigenous peoples have been severely divided, and so have been the farmers. Yeah, because they're given scholarships, they're given money, you know, and therefore that instead of farming, you become an employee, a construction worker, example. So there's a distortion of the perspective. I respect that there are scholarships. Yeah, you can be a scholar. You can have 100 scholars, fine. But you can weigh that with the pollution that has caused suffering to a number of farmers. Okay? We haven't quantified that. You need to quantify the value of the ecosystem's goods and services, the forests, okay, who provide oxygen, right? It's a carbon sink. It's the home to wildlife. There's non-timber forest products for the indigenous peoples. It's also sacred ground for some of them. And yet, it's also a watershed that provides water to irrigate the farmland. So there are really the value of ecosystem goods and services are very, very important. And a study has underscored that the value of ecosystems, goods, and services in Mount Matalingan protected landscape far outweigh the value of the minerals. There's a 2008 2009 study by Conservation International with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, where they said that the value of the minerals is 15 billion, but the value of ecosystems, goods, and services is 266 billion. So imagine they on the economic side, you, Mother Nature, while not being able to talk, you know, we are supposed to be their stewards. They have no voices in this struggle. It's very sad that they give us a lot of these benefits. And unfortunately, what is being harped, including by some officials in government, is jobs, displacement of the employees, scholarships, computer, daycare center, support to the school, pavement of roads. And we respect that. But those are things that the government should provide. Why is government not able to subsidize these things when they have the era, right? Why should why should the government be at the mercy of an extractive industry? So that to me is the irony, especially in a biodiversity rich province.
And still related to the current situation of mining, do I understand correctly that the moratorium on endorsements will affect projects that are trying to get cleared to mine, but not existing projects that are already underway in Palawan?
Yes, not existing projects. However, the I just want to clarify that in the same ordinance, it says that um, even if they're existing, but they expand into new areas or they increase mineral production, that will be covered. The endorsement should not be issued because, let's say, I'm the mining company. I cut 52,000 trees, but I want to cut 10,000 trees more. So I have to go to the endorsement again. And that is new area because you're going to cut a forest again. 10,000 trees.
So it will affect attempts on their end to expand the projects.
Yes, yes. That will be arguable, but to us, we made sure that that phrase will be there. Of course, their lawyers will debate on it, but for us, those are new areas. Because what are new? It's new because you're going to remove again a large chunk of forest, right? You cannot say this is the problem with the government. Let's say if this is a mineral production sharing agreement, they issue it to a mining company, 2,000 hectares. Okay, it's 2,000, but they only allow the authority to operate to 200 hectares. Imagine in the 200 hectares, um, in the 25 hectares that they initially destroyed, they already applied for 27,000 trees. Can you imagine? For like 50 hectares, it's 27,000. I said, my God, grabe. Yabong talaga ng Palawan. You know, really natural forest. And it breaks my heart that we can easily say, no, we planted 4.5 million trees in a nursery. How long will the 4.5 million trees take to replace century old trees? You know, you have to nurture that. And are they endemic species? It takes a long time for them to grow. Also, therefore, we have to really change our mindset, especially in light of the climate crisis. Our leaders should understand the importance of our forests and the wildlife. And that's the weighing scale.
What really stands out is it's hard to make that economic argument based on a few scholarships when you're weighing it against the climate crisis and how quickly and severely we need to act just to make sure it doesn't get beyond the point of making certain areas uninhabitable, making them too dangerous to live in.
So these are really challenges that we have been facing for years already. That we'll say 3 years or 5 years, but we want to save. Hopefully, the moratorium can save because if there are 78 pending applications outside of the city, because the city has 12, but the 12 will not pass anymore given the environmental code of the city. So you're looking at 78 applications outside of the city. The 78 applications will cover more than 200,000 hectares of forest. So you're going to save that, imagine, in the next 50 years, 25. So that is very, very important to understand.
Can you predict already how many of those 78 projects will be approved? Will none of them be approved? Will much less be approved because of the moratorium?
That's a very good question. All of them should not be endorsed because that's the moratorium. And that is what, speaking on behalf of the forest, and the wildlife, you're saving more than 200,000. It's probably 240,000 hectares. I forgot now, but you can say more than 200,000 hectares of forest that the 78 applications will cover. So that's a that's good, in the future. Because at the moment, we're still dealing with existing. In fact, some colleagues were saying, that's not really a um, perfect result, George. I said, yes. We do not expect 100% perfection because if you will say all the existing ones will be included, cannot pass. It cannot pass.
But okay, if 78 are not endorsed, does that mean that none of them will move forward, or will some of them still be able to start and move forward even without an endorsement?
Some probably will do it illegally. But, if you are a no nonsense investor, I think you should get the message rather than investing tens of millions, for a project or 100 million. And then you bribe your way through the process by paying certain officials. You have to realize that the everyone in Palawan, and that is what I'm happy about, is also vigilant, monitoring this. So it's very important that communities and civil society will continue to be vigilant to monitor the implementation of the moratorium. So the work is never ending. We have a small gain. I will say, okay, it's gain. At least you rest in these aspects, but the monitoring of existing ones will still proceed. Plus, you have to monitor the effective implementation of this moratorium on endorsement.
Yeah. And I think you were already touching it on it a while ago, but this is a win. And you mentioned a while ago that some people have tried to tell you that it's not big enough of a win, but can you talk about how you view it personally as someone who's been doing this work for several decades now? What does this win mean to you?
Well, um, for more than 35 years of work, I was actually, I shed a few tears when they banged the gavel on February 26th because I said, oh my God, I didn't expect to do that. So I was just wiping my tears away. It's a result of some people have died, a few friends have died already through the process. Doctors Antonio Socrates, George Soriano, and others. And, this is the part of the legacy. And Ma'am Gina as well. Ma'am Gina, Mayor Hagedorn, Dr. Antonio Socrates, George Soriano, and many other community leaders. And it's, it, I'm so happy. I'm really happy that despite this imperfection, can say, at least it's a good start that the provincial board listened. It's a good start for me that the governor was convinced that it is already about time to have a moratorium ordinance on new and pending applications. I was so happy. So basically, I might say that it is not 100% a victory, but every step of the way, you definitely need to, uh, you know, be patient and persevering that sometimes these battles are protracted, you know. And I've seen that even in our history. In the battle for our republic, you've seen the struggles, the rebellion. So I look at it that way, that you have to monitor, but to me it's a big win when you have the whole provincial board saying that yes, the mortem endorsement is already about time.
One last legal question. Does the moratorium on endorsements lay the groundwork for a stronger law in the future, like a moratorium on actual mining? Is this like a path towards that?
That's a good question. It's possible if, well, it depends if the current mining operations, there will be intense monitoring and it will establish really solid data that the ecosystems goods and services have really been disastrously, destroyed. Okay, just to exaggerate. So, um, if the flooding will continue, you know, and the farmers will not earn a lot, the indigenous peoples continue to be displaced. So, if the data in the next few years will show, Isabel, that indeed what we have been afraid of has become, is already reality, and you see that on the ground, I think it can pave the way for definitely, uh, safeguarding Palawan from extractives. So we are actually, you know, just to belabor this, we have a special law I mentioned to you. And technically, under that special law, yes, under the special law, we should not allow mining in the province. Nickel mining, because it says Section 9, um, natural forests are supposed to be core zones or areas of maximum protection. Plus, all growth forest cannot be mined under the Mining Act itself, but it's being violated by government agencies. So, um, the ordinance basically is an added layer of protection because if if Section 9 of the SEP law was effectively implemented, Isabel, you don't need that ordinance. The law is clear, but because it's not being implemented, there's value for political will, right? Plus, I also saw that the provincial board passed a resolution requesting the president, Bongbong Marcos, to declare Palawan as a no-go zone for mining and to push for uh, agro fisheries and tourism development. So that was also another resolution. And I said, well, I hope they will be consistent with that. So you see, it paves the way for other things. That it's time we develop our agriculture and fisheries, which is also battered at the moment. Uh, we also need to be more innovative with, technology available. even with tourism, because tourism can also, it's like fire. It can cook your food, but it can burn your house. So you have tourist resorts getting logs to build their structures, destroying mangroves. We've documented that here. So we do have other problems besides mining. Even tourism can cause problems. Oil palm plantations, reclamation, wildlife smuggling, illegal fishing. There's also still illegal logging, pollution, waste management. So those are just among the other problems. But because if an extractive industry will so will slow down in the next 50 years, I think that gives you space now in time to assess, study more, and look into what could be, uh, better alternatives. Because in Brooks Point became a first-class municipality as an agricultural municipality, not because of mining.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why the vice mayor said, "I'm a daughter of a farmer. I graduated, I became a lawyer."
And I was hoping you could share, like, in this rare environmental win that you managed to accomplish, what were the strategies or approaches that worked best for you?
Very, very important would be the awareness building. Okay, um, awareness, because even if we have laws, many people are not aware of the rights and remedies. And to generate such awareness, information dissemination, you have to do your on the ground education. So you have to mobilize as many civil society groups, church groups. Okay, very, very important. You have to utilize social media. So a combination of social media, traditional media, plus on the ground fora education, that should be together. No, nothing is an island. It has to complement each other. So that's very important. Social media played a very important role, um, even for generating awareness. The second will be the network. The role of the church is significant, with the bishop's pastoral letter, and all the churches were mobilized for the signature campaign. The civil society also moved, the people's organizations, the NGOs together. So that solidarity and that collective effort was not easy, because you really have to make sure, like, homilies have to include the moratorium, right? Yeah, the homilies of the priests. And we, in our trainings, we also had to say, what's the rationale? What's the legal basis? What's the moral ground? What's the scientific basis? We have to reiterate and reiterate. Now, when you educate, because that's what I'm conscious about, how do you translate the legalese into the simplest terms possible that the ordinary Palaweñan citizen could understand? So economics is very important. Of course, translating science into the simplest terms, the relating it to climate, relating it to livelihood, the impact of fishers, farmers, and indigenous peoples. Very important. The experiences in the past must be well documented, because you need them as data and evidence. When you tell them that people were polluted, there are 20 lobster fry fishers who have been displaced. So um, we complement our awareness and education work with research. Research and documentation is an integral part of the process. Network building, education awareness, research and documentation. And then also, um, of course, we are the legal team. We are not many though. But, translating everything into Tagalog and simplifying concepts was very, very important. Um, Building the right attitude, because it's very important that you develop patience and perseverance. I always keep on saying that dapat po magtiyaga tayo, wag tayo mawala ng pag-asa. On radio, I keep on saying that because at this day and age, there's a lot of fake news that will counter the campaign. We're red tagged, not communist. They label you, they lambast you. So you have to also be careful, you know, in how you engage. Um, Engaging with the government, with the officials, whether they can be the most corrupt. You've heard about the track record, and since they sit there, you always have to be, you know, patiently engaging them to also make them understand that this is our basis. No, there's research so that they will listen to you. Pooling our experts. We had scientific experts, technical experts, civil society experts, experts on livelihood. They were all together so that when we say number one, two, three, four, five, that should be solid information. You cannot just be speculative. And to me, I think that combination through the years, more than 20 years of work, I think finally bear partial, okay, success, I would say, because we persevered along the way.
And then final clarification, and I'll let you go. Does when you say network, are you referring to the formal Save Palawan network?
No, not only the Save Palau movement is just one.
No, bigger pa than that.
Yeah, bigger. It's a loose coalition, but it's a network with the Catholics, the other religious groups, teachers, youth, students. They're not necessarily members of Save Palawan movement, but even those in the social media, you know, um, that's a very big. They're very concerned. So to me, it's very important to sustain that. That's why the posting on social media has to be reviewed and checked because we want to make sure that it's accurate because there's a lot of fake news going around. Yeah, so that it may be loose. Okay, I'm not saying it's a perfect network, Isabel, because even right now, I there's also this is irrelevant, but the DDS, Digong, they had the rally last Saturday, and some of them were in Puerto Princesa. Yeah, and some of them are, of course, supporters of the moratorium. So you can just imagine people also supportive of the moratorium. They also have other political, what they call this, beliefs. So I also learned from that process. So, in a sense, you might say that it can be tactical on a particular issue. So, how do you bring that into a more strategic and sustained effort? You really have to combine that with organizing. To me, never-ending organizing uh, is a lesson, a very big lesson in the whole process.
That's it for today's episode of Teka Teka. I'm Bella Perez Rubio. This episode was edited by Anthony Tobias. We only briefly mentioned journalist Jerry Ortega in this episode, but we've dedicated an entire episode to his activism and how the effort to silence him led to his murder. We'll leave a link in the show notes if you'd like to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories covering the environment, climate change, or collective action, let us know in the comments or on social media. And please subscribe to us if you haven't already. Thanks for listening.